Welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. You know we always dig deep and try to bring you the insights that really matter. Make sure you hit that like button, leave us a comment, and subscribe to keep those brainwaves buzzing. All right, let's get right to it. Today we're diving into some South African politics with some really interesting interviews from Face the Nation on SABC News.
Oh yeah, some really good stuff.
We've got two big names in the spotlight today.
Yeah, who are we looking at?
First up is Angie Motshega, who you know is the Minister of Defense now.
Right, big shoes to fill there.
And then Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, the newly appointed leader of the MK Party in Mpumalanga.
Okay, so we've got the SANDF and the MK Party, two sectors facing some pretty big crossroads right now. The SANDF's wrestling with all these readiness questions, and the MK Party is riding high on those recent elections, but facing some internal struggles.
Lots to unpack. Let's start with Motshega. She just finished a really long run as Minister of Education.
Yeah, where she oversaw, pretty impressive metric pass rate, wasn't it?
87%, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, she was really proud of that. Actually, she called it out specifically. 87.26% to be exact. A real marker of stability in the education system, she said, the highest we've seen since 1994.
That's promising on the surface, but I can't help but be a little curious. You've mentioned some concerns about the education system before. Does this pass rate tell the whole story?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Motshega really emphasized collaboration. She was praising all the efforts at the provincial and district levels. But it makes you wonder, does that same collaborative approach work in a portfolio like defense?
Right. It's a totally different ballgame.
Exactly. Sometimes you need decisive action, not just consensus building.
And speaking of challenges, the SANDF's facing some pretty serious questions about its readiness, especially after those recent incidents in peacekeeping missions, particularly in the DRC.
Oh, absolutely. And Motshega, she acknowledges those equipment shortages and budget cuts. She didn't shy away from that.
But she also expressed confidence in their ability to defend South Africa. How can she be so confident when they're dealing with these huge resource constraints?
Well, her confidence seems to be rooted in the SANDF personnel themselves. Their training, their expertise. She emphasized the quality of their training programs, the skills of their commanders. But she also did acknowledge that a lot of the forces that they're up against are well-funded, with advanced technology.
So we're sending highly trained soldiers into these potentially dangerous situations with outdated equipment.
Sounds like it.
That doesn't seem sustainable, especially given the risks involved in these peacekeeping missions.
It's definitely a valid concern. Motshega mentioned exploring public-private partnerships, things like, sweating existing assets, as she put it, ways to generate revenue. But those are long-term solutions. In the short term, that resource gap is still a big worry.
It's a sobering thought. And then, on top of all that, you've got the whole issue with the Department of Military Veterans.
Oh, yeah.
Motshega herself called it structurally problematic. They've got a corrupted database, policies implemented in haste because of pressure from veteran strikes. A decade in, and these issues are still plaguing them.
It's concerning, really, especially when you think about the sacrifices these veterans have made. Motshega's plan prioritizes those basic needs: pensions, accommodation, healthcare. But, are those enough to tackle the bigger systemic challenges within the department?
That's a good question. And then there's the acting director general, who reportedly secured the position through prior learning recognition.
Instead, formal qualifications.
Right. Does this raise any concerns about the department's ability to effectively address veterans' needs?
It certainly prompts some questions about their capacity. Motshega defended the acting DG's qualifications, cited a postgraduate degree and all that, but the lack of a permanent appointment after all this time, that's a red flag for sure.
Yeah. Makes you wonder if Motshega can balance those immediate needs of veterans with the long-term reforms needed to actually fix the department.
Big question.
From education to defense, it seems Motshega has inherited a very complex and challenging portfolio.
Definitely. It'll be interesting to see how she adapts her leadership style to this new environment.
Yeah, she's got her work cut out for her. Now, let's shift gears to Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane and the MK Party. Her appointment as leader in Mpumalanga, well, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing, was it?
Not at all. The previous convener, Mary Party, took legal action. She argued she was the rightful leader even after the MK Party dismissed her.
Wow. So they basically just said, you're out.
Pretty much. It really speaks to the challenges a relatively young party like the MK Party faces. They're trying to solidify their foundation, but they're grappling with all these internal power dynamics at the same time.
And right into this storm walks Mkhwebane, claiming everything in Mpumalanga is going great. lifting accomplishments like securing offices, hosting events, even setting up a full detachment. But Mary Party came on this very show and said she was the one responsible for a lot of the party's success in the province.
Oh, that's juicy. A classic power struggle. Mkhwebane's highlighting her achievements, while Party's fighting to stay relevant.
It's like two completely different stories.
Yeah.
And then adding another layer to this whole thing, you've got Mkhwebane's transition from the EFF.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of talk about her being parachuted into this leadership role without having earned the trust of the people on the ground.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Parachuting, for our listeners who might not be familiar, is basically appointing someone to a leadership position without them having worked their way up or really connected with the local base.
So raises questions about, legitimacy.
Yeah.
Whether they really represent the people they're supposed to lead.
Exactly.
It's like these two competing narratives. Mkhwebane talking about unity and progress, but then you have all these underlying tensions and this question of grassroots support.
And Mkhwebane, she acknowledged those parallel structures within the MK Party.
What's that even mean? Parallel structures, why is that a concern for them?
So parallel structures are basically like these informal, unofficial power networks operating alongside the formal party structure. It suggests that there are individuals or groups within the MK Party who hold influence, but they might be resistant to Mkhwebane's leadership, potentially working against her efforts to unify the party.
Sounds messy. Both Motshega and Mkhwebane seem to be facing some serious leadership tests.
Absolutely. Their ability to navigate these challenges will have a big impact on South Africa's future.
No pressure then.
Right.
We're back, and wow, I'm still processing everything we've talked about so far. It's like both Motshega and Mkhwebane are stepping right into these minefields.
Oh, it's a lot to take in for sure, but I think it's important to remember that these challenges, they didn't just appear overnight. This is like years of issues coming to a head. They need real attention, decisive action.
You've hit on something really important, and I think it goes way beyond these individual leaders. Both these interviews raise these bigger questions about leadership and accountability, in South Africa as a whole.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Motshega, right? She's got this defense force that's struggling with not enough resources and this veterans department that's just riddled with systemic problems. And that didn't happen overnight. That's years of neglect, possibly from leadership failures at different levels.
And it's those veterans who end up paying the price.
Exactly. And then you have Mkhwebane stepping into this leadership role in a party that's fighting internally and dealing with these accusations of financial mismanagement.
It's striking to me that both women seem so determined to project this image of strength and control. Motshega insisting that the SANDF is capable despite all these challenges, and Mkhwebane painting this really optimistic picture of the MK Party's progress in Mpumalanga.
Yeah, I mean, projecting confidence is a pretty common tactic. It reassures the public, maybe silences critics within the party. But you know what they say? Actions speak louder than words. We have to look closely and see if their actions actually back up what they're saying.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Let's say they both succeed. What if Motshega gets the SANDF the resources they need and actually implements those reforms?
Right.
And Mkhwebane, what if she actually manages to unify the MK Party and build that strong grassroots support? What would that look like for South Africa?
Interesting question. I mean, a stronger, better equipped defense force, that's crucial for national security, especially with all the instability in the region. And a united and organized MK Party, they could really shake things up politically, could even challenge the ANC's dominance.
There's been talk about a potential coalition between the MK Party and the EFF down the line, but we talked about parachuting leaders earlier and how that raises questions about legitimacy. If they keep doing that, could it hurt the MK Party's ability to form a real, lasting alliance with the EFF?
Oh, absolutely. If people feel like leaders are being imposed on them, that can breed resentment and distrust. And that's not a good foundation for genuine collaboration. You need shared values, you need trust, you need grassroots support to build a strong coalition, and parachuting can undermine all of that.
So it's like these two parallel stories. Again, Mkhwebane talking about unity and progress, but then you have these questions about underlying tensions and lack of real support.
Exactly. And building trust and unity takes time, especially when you have these competing claims to power and influence. Mkhwebane even acknowledged those parallel structures we talked about, remember?
Right, those informal power networks.
Yeah, those. And those can make it really difficult to create real unity.
It seems like both Motshega and Mkhwebane are walking this tightrope. They have these huge leadership challenges ahead of them.
No doubt. And the choices they make, the way they handle these challenges, it's going to have a huge impact on South Africa's future.
It really feels like we're at a turning point in South African politics. But will it be a turn towards progress and stability? Or will it be more fragmentation and uncertainty?
I think that depends on the leadership of these women and those who come after them. The decisions they make now will have a ripple effect for years to come.
Big responsibility.
Absolutely.
And speaking of responsibility, let's go back to Mkhwebane's interview for a second. She really emphasized discipline and unity within the MK Party. She even compared it to the PSL, saying that players from rival clubs can come together to represent Bafana Bafana.
Yeah, she was basically saying that party members need to put the party's goals above their personal ambitions or loyalties to specific factions. It felt like a message aimed at those questioning her leadership.
It ties into this broader theme we've seen in South African politics, this tension between what individuals want and what's good for the whole. Finding that balance, it's so delicate, and it often gets lost in this struggle for power.
That's so true, and that tension isn't just in politics, it's in every part of life. It makes you think. How can people contribute to a society that works well together, that's productive, without having to sacrifice their own goals and values?
It's like, how do we become part of the team without losing ourselves in the process?
It's a deep question, something worth thinking about, not just in South African politics, but in our own lives, too.
All right, we're back, ready to put it all together after our deep dive into South African politics. It's been quite a journey, lots to think about.
It has been a lot, hasn't it? But I think that's what makes it so interesting. These are complicated issues, and I think you get a much better understanding when you look at them from different sides. Challenge those assumptions.
Totally. So before we go, let's try to boil it all down. What are like the key takeaways from these interviews, the things our listeners should really remember?
Okay, so the first one, the big one. The state of the SANDF, it raises some serious red flags about whether South Africa can really handle its security responsibilities, not just at home, but on the whole continent.
You're talking about the budget problems, the equipment shortages.
Yeah, exactly. Those are not small problems. They need to be addressed, like yesterday.
And Motshega's confidence in the SANDF personnel, their training and expertise, that's great, but...
It might not be enough.
Right. When you're that far behind in resources, it's a problem. This situation needs to be watched carefully.
Couldn't agree more. The second big takeaway, I think, is the infighting within the MK Party. It shows just how tough it is to build a real unified political movement, especially the relationship between the national leadership and those provincial structures. It's constantly changing. There's a lot of tension. For Mkhwebane to succeed, she really has to consolidate her power.
It's a real power struggle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much time and energy is wasted on these internal battles when it could be going to actually helping people.
Absolutely. And the final takeaway, I think, is this. Both these interviews highlight the issue of accountability in South African leadership, whether it's ignoring those problems in the Veterans Department for all these years, or those accusations of financial shady stuff within the MK Party. Transparency, ethical behavior, that has to be the standard at every level, no exceptions.
Accountability is so important, not just for those at the top, but for all of us. It's about taking responsibility for what we do and building a society where integrity and doing the right thing, those are the norm.
100%. And remember, accountability, it's not just talk. It has to be backed up by real action. You have to see results.
Absolutely. Well, that about wraps up another episode of The Unseen Wisdom. Hope you found this deep dive into South African politics useful. Make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more deep dives like this one.
And until next time, stay curious and keep those brain waves buzzing.
Knowledge is power, but remember, wisdom is putting that knowledge to good use. Go out there and make a difference.